Hi there guys, got a little video here for you today on FX transfer bolts, and what we're going to be doing in this one is deburring it. So this particular barrel is one I made up a little while ago, and it shoots very well single shot loaded, but as soon as you put a magazine in it, it tends to give a few extra flyers. Now you could argue that that's the magazine, but I've checked the magazine against another barrel and it works absolutely fine. So this is a fairly common mod that we normally do, and what we're going to be doing is just taking the burrs out the leading edge and from the transfer bolt. So I don't know how well the camera's going to pick that up, but as you look in the transfer port there's a couple little pieces of brass hanging down. There's one on that side that you can see quite easily, and on the leading edge or the loading edge, the 45 that's present from the factory is quite sharp. If you run your finger across it, it does feel like it's catching a little, so we're going to address that as well. So this is going to be a fairly simple process. It's just coming in the end here with the Dremel and a little bit of wet and dry sandpaper, just cleaning up all the edges and getting it nice and smooth. The idea of this little cleanup is just to make sure that the pellet picks up no extra damage as it's fed into the liner. And hopefully when this is done, this barrel should be as good with a magazine as it is with a single shot loader. In our testing and our sort of playing around, we've found that the way the pellet is loaded into the transfer port is one of the biggest influences on accuracy. And if there's any burrs, any problems in the transfer port, that's really going to affect your accuracy downrange. So first thing we're going to do is just remove the liner and the transfer port from the barrel. So we'll undo the jam nut, and then I'll take the transfer port off. Yours may be glued on, they do come with Loctite from the factory, so we'll just screw it off like so, stick the barrel to one side, and then the first thing we're going to do is come in with a needle file and clean up the inside edge of the transfer port. So the edge we're aiming for is the one inside. We're not too worried about the outside edge, although if it's particularly rough you could clean it up. And we're going to be using a needle file, just nice and carefully, going across the edges, the inside edges, removing any little rolled over pieces of material. Being careful not to go all the way through. The only piece of material we're trying to remove is that little edge. And I think I'm happy with that. You don't need to go mad with it, but as you see there, on that side we've no longer got the piece of brass sticking out from the inside of the transfer port. And then if we look from this direction, it's hard to show for the camera, but there's no longer anything hanging down on the inside. So you see the transfer port at the end there, rotate it nice and slowly. You can't see any additional material poking out from the transfer port. If there's any pieces of hanging down material, you need to remove them. Otherwise, when the pellet gets loaded in, the pellet will catch on them little edges. Next thing we're going to do is, using some 1200 grit wet or dry sandpaper, we're just going to come in the transfer port there, rotating it and just touching on the inside edge, this edge of the 45 here. What we're doing with this one is just removing the burr that's left by the 45-degree cutter. The 1200 grit sandpaper just removes the edge quite nicely. And then the same for the outside edge. You're not trying to remove any material doing this, you're just simply cleaning up the edge. And there we have it there. It's looking much better already. If you run your finger across it now, there's no sharp edges, you can't feel it dragging or pulling. And then with a cotton bud, if we pull it across the edges, the cotton bud's not getting dragged or pulled. Little fibres aren't being left, so we know that there's no burr there. Next we're just going to rub that up on some Scotch-Brite. This is the green stuff. Just rub the edge and then lightly rub the inside using the corner. That'll just even everything out, ready for the polishing. I've deliberately left the O-ring in the O-ring groove just to stop any major debris getting in the O-ring groove. If you take the O-ring out, what normally happens is debris packs up in the O-ring groove and it's quite hard to get out. So we've left it in. And then for the final polish, what we're going to be using is the Dremel, and I've got a round nose bit for the outside edge, so the pellet loading edge here, and I've also got a thinner piece that's going to go on the inside there and clean up the inside of the transfer pole. Just make sure that there's no scratches or burrs left in there. So we're going to be using some Autosol or metal polish. Just a small amount of Autosol will do. This is only brass, so it does take a mop in quite well. I don't know how well the camera's going to pick that up, but we've got a nice shiny edge there now. You're really not trying to remove any material with a Dremel, so nice light pressure. Just keep it moving, keep it rotating round, and again, just rubbing the finger over the top there. You can't feel any burrs or any sort of nastiness with the transfer pole. And we're going to be doing the same thing on the inside of the transfer pole. So I've swapped my mop over, put it in the back there. And I think with a bit of cleaning up that's going to about do it. So this outside edge is just a decorative feature, just to show that I've actually done this one. So what I'll do off camera is just clean this up nicely, replace the O-rings, and then show you what it looks like when it's done. So I'm really happy with the way it's turned out. You look down the centre there, it's all nice and shiny, all nice and smooth. We can't see any raised edges or anything that will impact the pellet as the pellet's pushed through and loaded into the liner. All that's left to do now is just replace the O-rings. So this one on the outside here is a 10x2, and then this one is the breech seal. So in this case it's a 177, so we're using a 4.3 by 1.5 O-ring. So the easiest way to do these is to feed the O-ring in from one side, take a nice sharp pointy thing, gently press one side of the O-ring into the seat, press the other side down, and then nice and carefully nudge it into the seat. You might get a bit of pop back like that, so we just swap it over and then push it in from the other side. Like so. Then there we have it, transfer port's back on the barrel and it's ready to shoot. So there's an easy way to test if the transfer port's putting any damage on the pellet as it gets loaded into the liner. So install the barrel into the rifle, put a magazine in with a pellet in, load the pellet into the barrel, then remove the barrel and push the pellet out the end. If you're nice and careful, the pellet will come out exactly as it was loaded into the liner, and you can inspect it and see if there's any damage to it. The key things you're looking for is any nicks or scores in the head and the skirt of the pellet. The skirt is much more important than the head, although damage to either one will indicate if your transfer port's putting damage to the pellet. But we've found that just removing the edges on the leading edge and the transfer port is enough to remove most of the inaccuracies caused by damaged pellets as they get loaded into the barrel. Another thing you can do to make the transfer port's job a little easier is as you push the bolt forward or your cocking lever forward, do it nice and gently. Don't slam it, don't force it, just push it nice and gently, and that will ensure that the pellets can find its own way into the barrel without being forced or crushed against the side. Anyway guys, that's going to about do it for this one. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.